Hi, everyone. Thank you today for joining us today for Office Hours with InSource and IDOE. I don't know if you'll be watching live or you'll be watching later on a recording, but InSource is the Parent Training Center for Indiana. We help families understand the special education process and build relationships with their schools. We help them understand about IEPs and their choices and advocacy skills, as they are the best advocate for their child. And so today you have joined us, and the Department of Education nicely partners with InSource each month, the fourth Tuesday of the month. And today we are thrilled to have Maggie Hampton, who's the Assistive Technology Specialist and at IDOE, and she is going to join us today. And we had a little bit of technical issues, so I am going to share the PowerPoint presentation. And bear with me, Maggie. I will try to make sure that I advance the slides each time that you need them. And Maggie's going to talk to us about evaluations today. So again, thank you so much for taking part today. And I'm going to go ahead then and share my screen so that Maggie can get started.
Thanks, Lisa. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining in while we talk about special education evaluation and eligibility for those services.
Okay, let's get this to... Okay, can you see it, Maggie?
I can. You can go ahead and
right.
go on to the next slide there. And that next slide just has, this is just a little bit of what we're going to cover today in our hour. We're going to talk a little bit about requesting an evaluation if you would like your child to participate in one of those, and just what does that look like? What is the process of an evaluation for eligibility for special education and related services? And what's that timeline? How long does it take? I also want to show you some of the different eligibility categories that you would be considering, and then what the criteria is to qualify for any of those. And then I always like to end with some resources as well to kind of help you extend your learning and keep digging into those resources. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, and these next couple slides, these are all going to be some definitions for you straight out of our Article 7, which is our rules for special education in Indiana. So our first slide here that you'll see, these have definitions for what is special education and related services. So special education is that specially designed instruction that's at no cost to the parent, and it's designed to meet the unique needs of a student who's eligible for special education and related services. So all of that instruction that's specially designed to meet a student's needs, that is what the definition for special education is. And then related services, that refers to transportation, but it also can refer to services like developmental, corrective, or other support services that are required to help your student with a disability to benefit from that special education. So some examples of what your student might benefit from, maybe it's interpreting services, mobility services, nursing services, psychological services, audiological services, and then there's also parent counseling and training so that you can support your student as well. All of that is included in the related services. Then we'll go to the next slide. And here's our definition for specially designed instruction. And specially designed instruction is really that's what's at the heart of what makes special education special. That's where we're looking at adapting content or methodology or delivery of instruction, the ways that we teach students. We're adapting that to meet the needs of the student with the IEP as appropriate. So specially designed instruction addresses those unique needs of your student, and it really ensures that your student has access to that general education curriculum. We plan specially designed instruction is special for every student, and it's planned for each student. It's based on their individual unique needs that arise from their disability, to just ensure that they can access and participate in that general education curriculum. Go to the next slide. And here we see some definitions for free and appropriate public education, or FAPE is what it's sometimes called. And students with disabilities have the right to a free, appropriate, and public education. So that includes special education and related services that are provided at public expense and no cost to you as a parent. They meet the standards of the state education agency, that's the Indiana Department of Education. Those services are included in early childhood all the way through high school. So your student would qualify for those services at any time, and they're provided in accordance of the IEP. So once your student has been evaluated and you create an individualized education program, you follow that to provide that free, appropriate public education. And then lastly here, special education and related services include the award of a credit, if you've got a high school student, a credit, and then also a diploma to the same extent that that credit is awarded to their general education peers. So to be eligible for that special education and the related services, to be eligible for that specially designed instruction, then that student needs to be found eligible for those services through the case conference committee. Okay, so still looking at some definitions. I promise we'll get to the process in just a minute. There's just so much language. So here you see the definition for a student with a disability and the educational evaluation. So to determine that a student is eligible for special education and related services, we have to have an evaluation completed that provides a complete picture and information about the student's disability. And that information can really help the case conference committee to determine whether that student is eligible for the services and what they need to support the student. So here you see on the next slide is our definition for what the case conference committee is. I'm sorry, did I skip one? I think I skipped one. Okay, that's FAPE and eligibility.
Okay. And then your next slide is
the student with a disability. Okay. Yep. So I'm sorry. Okay. So the student with a disability. Okay. So we can define that as a student who's been evaluated and determined eligible by the case conference committee. And then that evaluation is what we complete to determine if the student is eligible. So now we're going to go to the next slide. Okay, so this is the case conference committee group. So if you have already, if your student already has an IEP, then you've probably most likely participated in a case conference committee meeting. But this group would include parents and school personnel that's responsible for reviewing that evaluation report and then determining the eligibility. Once that has occurred afterwards, then you would be responsible as a committee to review and revise the IEP at least annually. And then you would also determine the special education and related services. You would determine the placement for where those services would take place. So as a parent, you are an important part of this team. And look at the next slide. Some other people on the team you'll see is the public agency representative. So the public agency is usually referring to the school corporation or the charter school that your student is attending. If your student does attend the School for the Blind, the School for the Deaf, or programs in the Department of Corrections, the public agency would be those places as well. But there's a representative from that public agency that will be a case conference committee member. Usually it's a school administrator, a principal, somebody like that that can speak to the resources that the school has that can be deployed for that special education. So you want them to be a part of the team. Some other people that you can think about, you can bring anybody that you want to your case conference committee meetings that would be helpful to speak to your student and their strengths. So some other people, if your student is an English learner, you might have some people on the English learner team. You would have general educators on your team. So this is kind of a big team of people that knows the student and can make decisions about what is most useful for them. And then our second definition on this screen is the definition for the IEP. So that individualized education program, a lot of times people think of it as a plan, but it's a program is what the IEP stands for. But that is the written legal document that's created by the case conference committee together. And that describes how the student will access their general education curriculum, if that's appropriate, and then the special education and related services that they need to participate in their school environment. All right, we're going to go on to one more page of definitions, and then we're going to talk a little bit about eligibility. So this last page of definitions, when you look at the process for an evaluation and a couple other things when you're going through the IEP process, they'll talk about days, and there are a couple different days that are described. So sometimes you will see when it just says day, they're usually talking about calendar days. Okay, so Sunday to Saturday. But sometimes there are business days that are referenced, and usually that refers to sending documents home with you to sign. You have business days to sign those. Okay, so when it refers to business days, we're talking about Monday through Friday. And then the third type of day is sometimes the instructional days are referred to, and these are the days of school. So usually school occurs on Monday through Friday, but we have spring break coming up, or maybe we have a snow day or something else that maybe there is no school for. So instructional days are just the days that the student is expected to be in attendance at school. So there's a couple different kind of days to think about when we're looking at timelines. Okay, so now let's look at eligibility. And I gave you this definition earlier with the Article 7 language, but just as a reminder here, a student is eligible for special education and related services when the case conference committee team has determined that the student's disability adversely affects their educational performance based on that educational evaluation that's completed. So on the next slide, when we're talking about eligibility, we're not talking about diagnosing a student, because the case conference committee, we're not doctors. So it's important to note, though, that a medical diagnosis it's different from a special education disability, but it is something important to consider. So we don't diagnose students with disabilities, but if you do have documentation from a medical doctor, maybe a psychologist, or anybody that you're working with on your own, you can bring all of that information, and that can be helpful for the case conference committee to use that information as part of their determination for eligibility. The reason we say that is because eligibility is really based on the educational factors and how that suspected disability affects the student's learning. So, for example, my son, when he entered into kindergarten, he had a medical diagnosis of ADHD, but that did not automatically qualify him for an IEP. I brought that information. I was not a special educator at the time, but I knew I was a general educator. I knew about IEPs. I said, okay, my son has ADHD as diagnosed by his doctor. We need to go get an IEP before he starts school. So that information was helpful to the committee, but they couldn't just take that information and say, okay, we're going to take this medical diagnosis and create an IEP. But we did use all of that information as part of the evaluation. We looked at all of that. Okay, so looking at the next slide, this is just what is an educational evaluation. So what we're looking for here is the case conference committee is going to determine whether the student is eligible for services, and we'll look at what they're drawing that from in a moment. And then if they are eligible, what kind of special education and related services do we need to meet the educational needs of the student? So those are the two things that we're trying to determine there. All right. So looking at before the evaluation, there's a couple things we need to do to prepare. So as a parent, you can request an evaluation at any time by contacting your child's school. If you have concerns and you'd like your child to be evaluated, you can request that. On the other side, your school, if they're maybe noticing some things and have some concerns, they can also request an evaluation from you. So when that happens, the school would reach out to you, but they have to obtain your consent before moving forward with that evaluation process. So they can ask you, but they cannot proceed without your consent. So if you are not okay with that, then that process does not move forward without your permission. Okay, so when you're looking at, okay, I would like to request an evaluation, how can you do that? So to request an evaluation, you can ask any licensed personnel employed by the public agency. So you don't have to figure out who the special ed department is or what the specific phone number is. You don't have to schedule any meetings with any principals or anything like that to get the process started. You can just start by contacting your child's teacher and letting them know that you would like this evaluation to get started. If you have a good relationship with the school counselor or somebody else at the school, and you're like, I just really like to call somebody that I'm comfortable with and have that conversation, they can usually help you get started. One suggestion that I have, though, is that if you could make your request in writing, it kind of helps with the timeline a little bit to make sure that your bases are covered and that the school is following through on that timeline correctly. So like I said, it's not required. You can request your child be evaluated just verbally, and that begins the timeline. But if you would like to write a letter, I do have a template. And Lisa, I don't know if you can grab that link and share it in the chat that's in my speaker notes on this slide. If not, you can look up template for special education evaluations. And there are some that are out there from the Center for Parent Information and Resources.
And Maggie, we even have some on our website.
Oh,
So
in-source has them, of course you do.
Yeah, at the end, when we're done, because I didn't want to take the chance of losing your slides, I'll look to see if I can find it. And then if I can, I'll put it in the chat also.
Yes. Thanks, guys, for being patient with me through these technical difficulties. Appreciate it. So yes, get that letter and send that in. But like I said, you don't let that stop you or hold up the process at all. You can request that verbally. So that is how you can request an evaluation. Once that request from a parent is received by the school, then the school is going to have 10 instructional days. So those are the school days. The school has 10 school days to provide you with a written notice that lets you know the school's decision of whether they're going to proceed with the evaluation or not. So they're going to take those 10 school days and they might look at some existing student data and determine whether they believe an evaluation needs to take place or not. So they might, if they determine that they're not going to complete an evaluation at that time, then they're also going to give you some information that lets you know why they determined not to move forward with an evaluation at that time. But then they'll also give you some information about your right to contest that decision. So like I said, when I came with my son, before we started kindergarten, I had that paperwork and I was ready for him to have an IEP before he even started in the school. So they came back and they said, no, at this point, we're not going to evaluate because we have not had a chance to work with your student to see if their disability actually affected their performance at school. So we did wait a little while and they had some time to observe. So we did come back later, but that was their reason for denying that. Now they, like I said, you also will get that information. You do have the right to contest that decision and say, I disagree. I'd like to continue to move forward with that. So if that is a situation that you're curious about, we'll touch base on that in just a moment. Now, if the school is the one, though, that requested the evaluation and they were the one that begun the process, like I said, they need to ask for your consent first, and they'll give you a timeline for that evaluation process at that point. They'll let you know that you'll get some copies of that evaluation report before everybody meets to discuss it. And then they'll make sure that you have the information you need to break that down. So if the school is the one requesting that and they're letting you know that, then it's really important to know either way, once that evaluation report is completed, what is in it. When you get those papers back, sometimes it's a lot of numbers, a lot of jargon that may be unfamiliar. So you can also ask to have that educational evaluation report explained to you before everybody meets together, so that you're really comfortable with what's in there before you start discussing it. Sometimes it's really hard to sit down in those meetings and not really know what's being said and kind of be picking it up as you go. So that is something that they should be letting you know about if they are the ones requesting the evaluation.
And Maggie, one other thing that we do state is we try to remind parents about that when they sign consent, to basically sign stating they would like to have it 5 days ahead of time, because as you stated, it really does help. Then they can look over it, show it to the doctor, family member, whoever they would like to, and they're not trying to break it down and read it at the meeting. And they can also ask, as you stated, for someone else to explain it.
That's right.
Before.
Yeah. Sometimes it's a lot of information, and it's helpful to know what your plan is for discussing all of that beforehand. I would really recommend somebody breaking it down and going over that. Even if you're really familiar, maybe you have another child that has an IEP and you've been through this process before, it's just really good to sit down and talk about that report before moving on. Let's see. I'm just looking. Can we go to we are on the next slide. Okay. Trying to keep up, making sure I'm on the right page. Okay. So with this piece, this is just talking about written notices. So things that come home to you, they need to be in a language that's understandable to you. It's in your native language or other mode of communication, unless it's not feasible to do so. So if you are if English is not your first language and you have another language that you prefer to have these communications sent home in, that is something that you have a right to, and you can request that. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is the disability categories. So if you are requesting for your child to be evaluated, or the school is asking you, what you're going to be looking for is the evaluation is going to look at specific eligibility categories. And there are 13 altogether. So you would determine ahead of time, or you can ask the school to kind of help you determine. But these on the next slide are the 13 disability categories that are defined by IDEA. And then you can also see here where they're described in Article 7. So there's a couple just small differences between IDEA, and that's our federal legislation, and Article 7, that's our state legislation. Anything from Article 7 is more strict than the IDEA federal rules. So we have autism spectrum disorder, blind or low vision, intellectual disability, deaf or hard of hearing, deaf blind, developmental disability, emotional disability, language or speech impairment, multiple disabilities, other health impairment, orthopedic impairment, specific learning disability, and traumatic brain injury. So those are the 13, and you see multiple disabilities in here. So if you are maybe concerned and you would like to have more than one disability looked at, you can request that as well.
And Maggie, one thing we talk about with multiple disabilities is there does need to be a significant cognitive disability as one of those.
Yes.
So
that is absolutely correct. All right. So related services. Again, I gave you all those definitions back at the beginning here. So we define related services at the beginning, but here you can see this reminder These related services can be provided directly by qualified professionals like your speech therapist, your occupational therapist, but they could also be provided by your students' teachers or paraprofessionals. So really just kind of looking at what would benefit the student. So that does not include medical devices, things like cochlear implants. So that would be something different. But we would be providing those at the school. All right, so here's a big list. A lot of times when people think about related services, they think about like speech therapy, occupational therapy, because those are ones that a lot of students might use, but there are so many other services to consider. Transportation is one. Physical therapy. We talked about interpreting services and parent counseling and training. Those are just a couple. So there's really a wide range of options for your student to benefit from. So, you know, all of these are available depending on what is needed for your student and their unique needs. So let's talk about during the evaluation, what's going to happen there. So once you provided that consent and you said that you agree to that evaluation, then the team is going to begin the process of conducting that evaluation. And it's going to end with an educational evaluation report that addresses all the components of each of those specific suspected disabilities that you identified. That report is pretty comprehensive and it should give a really detailed description of the whole child. Most educational evaluations, they're completed within 50 instructional days, and 50 school days can be a lot. So, so mapping that out and what that looks like, especially if you've got a summer break in there or a winter break in there, it can take a little while. But again, we're trying to gather that comprehensive picture of the child. So there are a couple times where that timeline might be just a little bit different. It might be a little bit shorter than 50 instructional days. If you have a child that's transitioning from early intervention into early childhood special education, then that timeline will be based around their birthday. If maybe as a parent, it's really difficult for you to bring the student to be evaluated and we're not able to meet that 50-day timeline due to attendance, then we might need to adjust that timeline and work with you on that. Also, maybe, like I said, 50 days is a long time. And if in that time, maybe your family needs to move to a new school district, then that evaluation process timeline would need to be adjusted in those kinds of situations. But usually it's about 50 instructional days. So during that evaluation process, the team is going to be doing a bunch of things. We're going to be completing evaluations by doing some observations where we're just watching the child in different kinds of environments. Maybe you'll have a school psychologist that's working with the student and doing some interviews and some different activities. And most likely you will also be asked to complete some questionnaires or some types of screeners to really get that full picture of the child. We want to see how the student is doing at school, but also there are some things that are going on at home that could probably be helpful as part of that observation. And then once that whole evaluation is completed, all of that information is put into a report. And then we schedule that case conference committee meeting to determine if the student is eligible for the special education and related services. Again, we want to make sure you understand that report and you request that copy to have a meeting ahead of time and have the school explain that evaluation report for you. Okay, so after the evaluation, after all of that is completed, you've waited a long time, your student's done some work, you've done some work. So once that is all completed, the case conference committee team is going to meet to determine if the student is eligible for special education and related services. So they're going to look at that evaluation report and compare it to the eligibility criteria that's in Article 7. And if the case conference committee determines that the student is actually eligible, then the next step would be to determine what the services are that are necessary to meet the needs of your student. So determining eligibility, I know I'm saying this a lot, but everything's an individualized process. So determining eligibility is an individualized process. And considering all of that information that is in that report is really important for the committee to look at. One thing that was frustrating for me as a parent is I got that huge pack of paper from the evaluation, and there wasn't an end. There wasn't an eligibility at the end. The school psychologist that completed that report didn't do that work for me. But I learned that is the role of the case conference committee. There is no conclusion at the end of the special ed process that tells the committee these are the results. Your student is eligible for this category. That is up to the committee to look at the report and make those decisions based on the information that you've collected. So once you have that, if you have determined that your child is eligible for special education related services, then you'll go on to developing the IEP. So we can go to the next slide. So again, very individualized process to develop an IEP. The case conference committee is going to use that evaluation report, and they're going to determine what those special education related services are going to be that meet the unique needs of the student, regardless of the disability. So just because you have a specific disability category that was identified for your student to be eligible for, that doesn't unlock certain services or anything, a certain type of IEP, nothing like that. All of it's individualized still based on the needs of the student. So the eligibility category can definitely give us information, but every IEP is going to have the same components, and the contents will be different every time for every student. Okay, so at the beginning of the evaluation process, you were asked to sign consent for that evaluation. But then again, once the evaluation has been completed and we've determined that that student is eligible, the case conference committee creates a plan. And then at this point, you would again provide consent. At this point for the plan, you're saying you're in agreement to the plan that was created and the program that was created. So this time to implement the IEP. So in order to initially begin providing services and support, you need to agree to those services. So if you're unsure or you're in disagreement with anything that the case conference committee is determining, you don't have to agree with that. Instead, you can say, I'd like to relook at this section. You can pause a case conference committee meeting and come back to the table maybe at a later date if you sometimes maybe need a little bit of time to consider things. But really you need to make sure that the program is what works best for you and your child. So you should be in agreement with that. On the next slide, oh no, hang on, sorry. Oh no, you're right, sorry. You're right. That's the right one. So on this one, this just says, if you do not consent to the initial start to the services, then the school is not going to provide them. So your support and agreement to the plan is very important in order to get those services started. So you want to make sure you're comfortable with what's being decided. All right. So once you do consent to those initial services identified in the IEP, then the program that is described, it begins within 10 instructional days. So the school has about 10 school days to get everything ready and put into place to begin that IEP. So that doesn't necessarily mean that every time we'll be waiting that long. Sometimes schools will be ready a little bit quicker, but sometimes you have an educational evaluation and you find a lot of information and you determine a lot of changes need to be made. So sometimes there needs to be a little bit of time for the school to prepare for that. So after that initial IEP is implemented, though, your case conference committee is going to meet at least once a year to update and revise the plan as needed. And you can request those meetings at any time as a parent if you'd like to revisit things. When those changes are made after that first initial IEP, you have 10 days as a parent to consent to the IEP or to request changes. So at that point, if you don't sign after that first IEP, then on the 11th instructional day, the 11th school day, that IEP will just be implemented as written. So it's always a good idea to provide your consent if you do indeed consent. But again, if you do not, on the 11th day, they'll begin implementing those services. So if you have, oh, go ahead, Lisa.
That's right. And Maggie, one of the things parents sometimes don't understand is the fact that just saying, I don't like the IEP after the initial ones, the second or third, isn't really enough. They need to basically contest and ask for an action, ask for a meeting with their special ed director, ask for mediation, maybe move to due process, but you hope to solve that at a lower level. So just saying, I don't like this, according to Article 7, they need to actually contest and ask for another action to try to solve the problem.
That's right. Yes. And there, also with that, you know, there isn't a limit to the amount of times that a case conference committee can meet or the amount of times that a case conference committee can make changes to an IEP. So nobody should feel pressured to agree to changes if you really don't agree to them. We want to make sure that everybody's in agreement. As a parent, sometimes you come into those case conference committee meetings and it might feel like there's a school, you know, of people, you know, there's all these people from the school and then there's you on your own, but really you should be a team together and you should be a part of that team. So everybody is agreement on what is in the IEP. All right, let's look at some frequently asked questions. So the first one is, what if my student just needs the related services and not the special education? Can a student receive only the related services? And the answer to this one is no. If the committee determines that the student only needs a related service and not the special education part, then that student is not going to be eligible. It might be a case that I'm not going to speak for every student, but this might be a case where you're looking at maybe a 504 would be more appropriate. So there might be other places that you could search. On the next one, can a student be eligible for more than one disability? And this is yes, students can be evaluated and found eligible for more than one disability category. So you might have a student who is you have a student who has an eligibility of autism and a language impairment, and they would have services and a plan to support both of those needs. All right, and then this is the part I wanted to make sure that we stopped here because I told you earlier we would get back to this part. What if I don't agree with the results of the educational evaluation? So going back to the beginning, if you had requested an educational evaluation, the school has 10 days to respond with whether they will or will not proceed with that evaluation. So if they say that they will not proceed and you disagree, then there are some steps you can take. Or maybe you get through the evaluation process and it's determined after that evaluation that your student is not eligible for services and you disagree with that piece. So if you are in disagreement about the evaluation, here's some steps you can take. So first, you do have the right to request an independent educational evaluation at public expense. So that evaluation will be conducted by a qualified evaluator who's not employed by the school. They're not responsible for the student. And if you request that independent educational evaluation, the school is going to give you information about where you can go to get that evaluation and any other criteria that you need to know about. And if that is the case, then you are entitled to receive one independent educational evaluation at public expense for each time the school conducts the evaluation that you disagree with. So that means if you request that independent evaluation and the evaluator says your child is still not eligible for those special education and related services, you wouldn't be able to ask for a second independent educational evaluation at public expense. So you can still go get that that second independent evaluation, but that would not be at the school's expense. That would be at yours. Okay. And that I wanted to make sure we had some time for questions. Really quick though, I want to share just a couple resources because I know there'll be some questions. We do have some resources on these slides with some different resources from the Indiana Department of Education and also our partners at the IEP TA Center. And then we also have from our national TA center, the Progress Center, they have some really good documents to help you as parents maybe prepare for the IEP team meetings, get ready, and kind of walk you through some different places you might want to take notes at those meetings. So those will be on the slides for you to click on those links later. But I would love to answer any questions that you guys have. How can I answer your questions?
Maggie, this has been a great opportunity to go back to the basics, and we get lots of calls about evaluations and walking families through things like what you just talked about. Medical diagnosis is very different than an educational evaluation. So if you would love to put some of the resources in the chat for us, that would be great. Otherwise, I can also send out, or we can put the PowerPoint in the chat if you like. But we know that the Department of Education, if you look under special education, has a lot of this. We have our parent-to-parent guide document, and that also talks about evaluations. And then, of course, there's navigating the course that's being updated by the Department of Education as we speak. And we know that many times people are going to be watching this at their convenience. So does anybody have any other questions? And Maggie, you did a great job, especially when you're not doing your own slides. That's always a little bit more difficult.
Well, thank you for being patient with me.
You did a great job. Well, if we don't have any questions, Maggie, thank you so much for this and for being willing to come and speak to us today. This will go up on our YouTube channel, and anyone can send it out to families, send it out to friends, community stakeholders when they're wanting to know information about special education evaluations, about IEEs and the Article 7 citations that reference those so that they can be aware.
Perfect.
Does anyone else have anything that they would like to add at this time? Well, thank you so much. Again, I'm Lisa Paddock, and you have been with Office Hours with IDOE and InSource, and we've had Maggie Hampton today talking about evaluations, and we thank you all so much. And if we have no questions or any other comments, I will go ahead and end the recording. And thank you very much for attending today. And thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.